Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kimura Life Podcast. This is my friend Tom. Tom, would you like to tell us a little bit more about you?
Sure. My name's Tom Runyan. Right now, at this point of the journey in my life, I'm an attorney in real estate law, but I'm also pursuing volunteer work in the hospice organization, death doula, and learning just more about the art of dying.
Wow. And that's super powerful because I was just telling you that this topic for me is like so close to my heart. I feel this connection in therapy when I'm in session with clients. It is often something that people bring up or don't bring up, right? And it's a topic that I feel like people don't talk about that much. When you pass away, right? Or when you die, or the fear of death.
The fear, I think the
grief.
fear is so prevalent.
Yes.
And maybe just because it's the unknown.
Yes.
What happens?
Yeah, it's like there's so many things from like ritual wise, like from the past that people, how do they approach death? And when we do approach death, like how do we cope through it? How do we work through it? Like, right? And then you being actively present when someone is passing away, like how is that experience for you? Like tell us more about that because
everything started for me in 2012, actually, when my mother was dying. And she was in a nursing home in Kentucky after living here with me in Florida for quite a while. And I went home, we enrolled my mother into a hospice program, and I didn't know what it was. And the most important thing was I need some education. Tell me what's going to happen. I'd never been around someone actively dying, let alone being there with them when they pass away or transition. And I didn't get that from this organization. So as mom was taking her last few breaths, the nursing staff said, okay, she has about 5 more minutes. And they prepped us a little bit, but we all stood around her and then just started saying how much we loved her and sent her out with all of the love, all of her family love with her. And I knew then that was going to be powerful. And looking back, it's the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my life. And watching my mother take her last breath. There was no fear with anyone in the room. And my mother was definitely ready. She said it. But when I go back now and look at it after some of the training I've had and other experiences, it's absolutely the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced.
Wow. And like that for me is like so profound because I've been exploring as a therapist, right? Like what is needed in this moment in time when someone's actively dying and we have family members around us, or we may not have any families around us, and what does that look like in the mental health aspect? Because we often are presented or come into the picture when the person has already passed away, and then the families reach out to therapy and they come to therapy and they're dealing with grief and they're working through grief, and we get them there. But I just wondered and like explored, like what would it look like if there was a therapist present in the moment of someone actively dying? And I feel like in this space, there's a lack of mental health professionals. And then we have you all like volunteering and like these strong, beautiful beings, like in the presence of someone actively dying. And I'm like, I don't want to replace them. Like I just want to see like, what does that look like? And what is that experience like, you know? And is there space for mental health professionals to be in that moment with someone who's also volunteering? And
absolutely. The whole hospice foundation is centered around an interdisciplinary approach. So you have a medical doctor, you have nurses, assistants, you do have therapists, you have social workers. Then it comes down to the volunteers, either a volunteer hospice person or even a death doula who is there. And what it does is it empowers not only the dying person, but it also empowers their circle of care, be it family, friends, loved ones, their pets, anything like that.
Yeah.
And it helps demystify and take the fear out of the death process. Doesn't make it any easier, but someone with a mental health background would pick up on this instantly and see all these people coming together to support not only the person who's about to transition, but also their family. Because if, like I said earlier, I didn't know what to expect with my mother passing. And had I had the knowledge that I have today, it would have been even easier for us.
Yeah.
My mom was ready. She's like, her body knew what it was doing.
Yeah.
And so there's absolutely space. And it comes with things like this podcast, being able to educate people and take the fear away from this process. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, from the moment we're born, we're dying, right?
Yeah.
So that's something we have to have a little more education around.
Yeah, and that is often not the case, right?
I would say very often not.
We see death as this unknown thing that happens, and we know ultimately it will happen, but there's a sense of, I see a lot where there's a sense of avoidance. There's also this ongoing theme in therapy about wanting to control the situation, and then there's a lot of like high anxiety, and then it's almost like when you're in this situation of someone actively dying, do you learn how to surrender that control as well because you've experienced someone actively dying?
Well, there's a saying, you can't communicate with someone. You have to be at the same place in order to communicate with someone. It doesn't mean that I have to know what it's like to die in my own personal existence, but as much of it as I can experience through example, witnessing, those types of things, then you're able to say, oh, this is what it's like. We watched a video the other day in a training I'm in, and it was a TED Talk, and this woman started off very broad, saying, we're learning about the diagnosis. You've got 3 months left to live, and da-da-da. And then she went all the way down to the very last breath.
Wow.
And it was interesting. She said, we're waiting for that Hollywood version of death, which is this big whatever. Somebody chokes and kicks it or whatever. But
action.
Actually, all it sometimes is just there's a breath that goes in, or there's a breath that goes out, and then there's not the following. And that's it.
That's it.
And that's it. And she did a brilliant job of being able to express. And by the way, she was quoting a doctor who was talking to an actively dying person who was lucid about the entire dying process. And the whole time, the woman was rubbing the doctor's hand, saying, and just absorbing this. And she was able to cope with what she was going through and understand it better. So again, education, talking about it, not being afraid, I think is the key.
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier, which was radical acceptance as well. Like, in that moment, do we learn to surrender and also radical accept our own immortality in that process? And how have you been able to work through this? And I know this is like a very spiritual also moment for you in this time right now. Like, in what lens have you seen this? What are some things that have came up for you that you say, wow, like this is something that the world needs to know?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think the very first thing is in this death doula course that I'm taking right now, you sit down and it's a Zoom training. There's about 20 people in it. And the very first thing is you've got 3 months to live. What are you going to do? And so you're sitting here going, wait, I'm at whatever stage I am in my life. There's people way younger than me. There's people way older than me in this course. And we all had this like deer in the headlight look on our faces, right?
Yeah.
So imagine that's what you are with a real diagnosis and that's happening. And then it just takes you, sometimes people giving you permission to think about it, someone who could help you plan or ease you into it. But the whole goal behind hospice and doula work and the interdisciplinary approach and assistance in helping people die, not giving them medicine to make them die per se, but helping them prepare emotionally and spiritually, is self-autonomy. Like, what does your death look like to you? How do you want that? Do you want music around you if you're capable? You know, of course, we can't rule out the sudden death because there's really no planning for something like that. But, you know, if you've got an end of life, people who've just, their bodies in their 80s and 90s are just shutting down. How does that look for you? And again, I know I keep saying fear, but taking away the fear from it helps people adjust, I think, and their families.
So like normalizing the fact that death is coming.
Yeah.
And normalizing the fact that you can control in some way, shape, or form your death. Like you can decide, like the permission of, wow, like I can decide to put music around me when I'm dying, right? Because like we often tend to see death as something so sudden, like you mentioned. In this moment in time, why can't we plan for your death?
Well, exactly. Well, one of the things when we were doing this exercise, a gentleman said, there's a certain type of cologne, there's a scent that I would like around me because I really like that scent.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about something like that, but it can be anything. And just asking then gets people to help deal with it. And I think you asked a question a minute ago, like, well, how do they get prepared? Well, what do they want? Number one, if you're interested in hospice, you're open to a whole different approach.
Yeah.
You know, and then what you have to do is, does the hospice go further and help explain to you and your loved ones and your circle of care what's going to happen? Or do you want to just fight it, dig your heels in, and kind of skid into the grave, or what other way? You know, people, but it's whatever you want. And even if you're in hospice and you choose not to believe that you're going to die and you fight it, that's kind of your choice. And it's not my job or anyone else's job to question why. We'll get back to the why later because there was a beautiful story about that. But I think that the whole thing is, you know, giving people permission to die. Sometimes the loved ones say, Mom, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay. We will be okay. Dad, you know, wife, husband, whatever, will be okay. And a lot of times after that's said and maybe that person leaves the room, the person passes away.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a very common story because it happens to, well, in my own experience, you know, one of my close relatives, my aunt, was fighting cancer, and I spoke to her on the phone, and I told her, you know, we're all here together, it's okay. And she had earlier told me a few months before that she was working on surrendering. And so my last words were, it's okay, you can surrender now. And I think that powerful. Was a huge piece there of like permission, you know, giving someone a permission to say, it's okay, we're together, we're here, you can move forward with this action, right, of dying. And a few minutes after that, she had passed away. And it's something so profound that I think a lot of people tend to like skip that part. You know, like, we go straight into grieving, and then like, what happened? You know, how do we actually become more present when someone is actively dying versus there's a famous quote. I say it's a famous quote, but it's not that famous.
Well, it is today, right?
I say it's famous because it impacted me so much in session. Someone said, don't borrow the future's grief. And to me, that was like mind-blowing, because I was like, how often do we spend so much time in the future grieving each other or the relationships or the people or the situation instead of focusing in the present,
Right.
in what you can do right now and
Right.
acknowledging the person right now, and regardless of wherever they're at in their process, and it's almost like in that moment, we all process it so differently, right? Some people are more present, some people are not so present. And I feel like a death doula or like a mental health professional or someone assisting in that process could help everyone be more present with it.
Education.
Yeah, education.
Education. And you know, surrender is such a, it's such a term that like smacks me in the head all the time. And it's so present, not only with dealing with death, but every part of life, right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing the stories I've heard of the dying person surrendering
Yeah.
and then telling their loved ones to surrender. And I have another personal story. When my mom was passing, it was just my mother, myself, and one of my cousins, an older male cousin of mine, came into her room. And at that point, my mother's cancer had metastasized into her brain. So she was unable to speak clearly. She could, but she knew what was going on. Empathy, you could see her eyes and everything. And he just started crying and was unable to communicate to her. And all she did was put her arms out like this and bring him in for a hug. So there my mom was, and she passed away 24 hours later. There my mom was giving him comfort in her time of passing. And wow, that's such a huge concept.
Yeah. It just shows that we are our most authentic self or our best self all the way until the end.
Absolutely.
Like our essence sticks with us all the way until the end. And it's interesting to explore, like, is it the end, right? Like, it depends on also like what we believe in, our spirituality, our religious beliefs, and like what the relationship looks like, because relationships continue. And I often introduce this theme in session in therapy, like, what is the relationship you have with your loved one after they have passed away? What does that look like? Because it comes in forms of like symbolism, conversations,
smells,
memories, smells, animals. I've seen that, and it's almost like, how does it continue? How can we continue to heal, right, through grief, work through grief, and carry on their legacy in some way, shape, or form? Or because part of the, like, when we have a client with a lot of grief, one thing that we often go to is, what can you do in memory of this person? So it doesn't have to just end when they physically are passing away. It could continue this conversation, this journey with this person, but it just looks slightly different, right? And so it's so interesting, like, what does that look like for people, you know? And I don't know, in your experience, what does it look like for you? Do you think that there's life after death, or there's something else after death, you know?
Absolutely. I believe in a continuum, you know, past lives to future lives and those types of things. And we can get into that, but I wanted to
go for it.
I want to back up 1 second, because part of what's so important about the whole dying process is meeting every single person where they are. And I said that earlier, you've said that earlier. And my belief system isn't necessarily yours or anyone else's, right? So you have to look at the fact that someone may not believe in the afterlife. It's like, I said this earlier, light switch off and I'm done. Okay. And I can't judge that. You can't judge that. And I'm sure, I'm not a therapist, but I'm sure you know that. It's like, where are you in your belief system, be it cultural, religious, be it, whatever it is. So I think that's super important in how the whole team comes together if you have time to plan for a death, and being part of this interdisciplinary team really will help everyone. And then you don't have to say, and here's getting back to that word why. Like, why do you believe that? Because then I'm on the defensive. Like, well, am I bad? Am I wrong? Wait, am I going to heaven? Am I, where am I? What is that? So you don't put someone on the defensive, and you want to approach it in such a way as to make them comfortable and do all that. And your biases, whatever those are, have to go away.
Yeah.
And you can't be thinking of the next question. The present, you mentioned this, being present is so important.
Yeah.
Like, what did that person just say? And sometimes the answer is no answer at all.
Yeah,
it's just listening.
Just is.
It's being.
And it's interesting because I often talk about being present as in time slows down. And I can see this process of an actively dying patient be like a slow motion, and we just have to be in the slow motion of time. And comfort, I think, goes a long way, because you mentioned physical touch, someone, the doctor touching or the patient touching the doctor, words of comfort, and it's so interesting because affection at that point is like super important, and that could be affection verbally or a physical touch of comfort. And I just wonder, like, I just see all the possibilities of like maybe music or a poem.
Sense,
You mentioned sense. You mentioned a reading to someone when we spoke on the phone.
Yeah.
And like that experience of just having someone next to you reading something to you.
So I took a vigil training course with my hospice work, and 2 days after the completion of that, I'm on my way home from work. I get a call. We have an actively dying patient. Can you go with them? And I was like, wow, okay, yes. Number one, yes. But I said, is it okay that I can only be there for a couple of hours? And they typically want you to be there until they pass. And the science of dying is pretty there. I mean, everyone dies in a very similar way if it's a progress, and your body, how your body shuts down and all that. Not to simplify it, but I'm just saying there is a science to that. And I show up. I did not know this patient whatsoever, and I was just there. They were unconscious. The breathing slowed, and I ended up staying for 4 hours. And this patient, I was able to watch go through the actively dying process. But I was there. I was playing music. I knew a little background. I was communicating, and I was just there watching this patient. And I found out the next day after I left that the patient passed away within 2 or 3 hours of me leaving. And number one, I didn't feel guilty because I couldn't stay. I felt honored to have been part of this process in any way, shape, or form. And medical experts will say that as the person is passing away, they can hear you. And
it's the last thing.
It's the last thing to go. And that's why when my mother passed, we were all kind of there with the love, the affirmations, whatever people needed to say, standing around her bed. And so I think that's important.
Yeah. Do you think, this is a question, maybe it looks different for other people, but do you think that because that process with your mother of being so present with her when she passed away, has that helped you grieve later on? Has the grieving process been, well, we don't know the difference if it wasn't or wasn't, but do you feel like grieving has been, it's been, I guess, easier to grieve because you're also experiencing someone actively dying? Has this been part of your journey or continuous?
Oh, it's absolutely why I'm here today. Okay. I mean, it was that, and whether, however I grieved after my mother's passing, has helped me in many ways of grieving any type of loss or, an expectation, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with all the stages of grief.
Yeah.
I've read them before, but I couldn't quote them.
We
But
jump from everywhere,
yeah,
get
blah, blah, blah,
different
blah, blah.
ones, yeah.
But my overarching feeling about it is that you take every experience in life and it all leads up. And if you're awake enough to recognize it, right? If you're in that alignment with how you want to show up, then you're constantly looking back on things and going, oh yeah, okay, wait, I'm reacting right here. And I truly want to respond instead of react. And here's what happened in the past. And to me, the victory in the grieving process or any of those things is the realization that I'm out of alignment with kind of how I believe. And that belief, for me, the belief pattern changes through your life, right? If you're introduced to something new, how does that impact you? So you're constantly looking back a little bit. I say, and that may say like, oh, well, you're not staying in the present. But no, your present is influenced by the things you've experienced up to that point.
Yeah. You mentioned something interesting to me when the first time we spoke on the phone, which was, I don't care anymore about being reactive, or like there's something around those lines. Like if something happens, I look at it with a different lens now. Like I no longer approach situations like as a reactive self or like your worst self. Like or sometimes your worst self does come out, but like what, and does that correlate with the experience that you've had so far?
Let me give you an example. Being a lawyer, there's confrontation, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people just get off on that, right? It's like, let's butt heads, right? Okay. And I had an experience where I was at a closing, my client was there, and another person came in, and their energy was 20 feet ahead of them as they were coming into my office. As they walked back, and it kind of hit me like this, and I'm just like, whoa. And this person just had this
intense,
and
anger.
What typically, I mean, your ego gets involved here at this point, and you're like, I'm going to meet that energy, and I'm going to go right back at you. And I just took a breath. I've heard you say breathing is so important, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. Breathing is so important in this. And I'd say within 30 to 40 minutes, the temperature in the room came down, the temperature of this person came down. And so being able to not react. So in the past, I may have been like, and let me just get right at this person. Because either that's an egoic response or some other type of response, right? But I was like, so it does work when A, you breathe, and B, you don't react right away. And then how do you respond? And I look back at that because I was so reactionary when I was younger. I mean, anything. It was like, rah, 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 you know? And
gloves on.
Gloves on. Don't mess with my ego, whatever that is. And so I think, and whenever I'm out of alignment with that, the moment that I realize, oh, wait, I just reacted, I don't beat myself up. I basically applaud myself and say, you realized the issue. Now you can get back into it. Into whatever that is.
Problem solving.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because it almost seems like normalizing death, right? And being present with it. You learn how to actively be present in your life. Right? And like appreciate all the little things that happen around you. And then when these curveballs come towards you, we're able to like, like make decisions in the present and then problem solve them a little bit more effective. And it seems like death not only helps, the whole topic of death doesn't just only help you conceptualize or process death, or like try to process death at least, or acknowledge death, but it also helps you when you are on the day-to-day, because now you know that every single moment counts,
right,
and that whatever you say next is important and it's meaningful, and how can I serve this person in the most positive, effective way, right? Instead of going the other way, right? Like being reactive, going back to someone and like getting pissed off at them or
Right.
whatever. And it just allows it's interesting because it's this process of like change, right? Like how I used to be like this, I want to change. This process has changed me to do things differently.
Well, I think
it's interesting.
a really good example. How many times have you been on the interstate and someone passes you aggressively, it gets in front of you, and you're like, you want to. So, does that matter when a person is actively dying, or just before that, or they're actually faced with their mortality? Does that road rage matter? Do they give a crap about that? Do they care about the fact that someone's dog pooped in their yard? No, they're sitting there. And so when I'm talking being present, and I'm still learning this, when I'm talking being present, I'm talking literally listening to what's coming out of that person's mouth and trying not to have judgment, bias, any of those other things that come into your mind and may impact what my role is in that person's process right now. And that's the hardest thing. And in the training I'm in right now, the death doula training, everyone is saying it too. Like, man, I'm sitting here going, I want to put my 2 cents in. I want to help them. That's what we do if you're full of compassion and kindness. You want to help people.
Yeah.
But helping is not always coming up with a solution. It's listening.
Is listening. And it's interesting because it's not active listening. And I like to call what you're describing like heart listening.
Yes.
Actively listening is one thing, right? Like maybe reflecting or repeating and paraphrasing. But heart listening is also without judgment, with empathy, with compassion. And that's a very, I want to highlight this one. This is a very good skill to have, being able to see someone where they're at and the human aspect of them, right? Like not knowing all the answers, but being able to hear them, hear their essence, hear where they're coming from with heart, with love. And
how do you, in your profession, how do you get to that space? I've wanted to ask this in my course. It just hasn't been the right time, but maybe you can give me the answer. How do you get to that heart compassion listening? And is it natural? Do you have to have someone kind of guide you? What?
Well, how did you get to that space? Whew. It took a lot.
59 years worth of trial and error.
That's what I'm saying.
But some people don't wake up to that, right? No. That's the thing.
Well, I think it takes a moment in time that we identify that something needs to change. I think that would be the first step. Like saying nothing right now is working and something needs to change. And I think willingness is the next step. Like what is something that I need to do in this moment to begin my journey to get to that point, right? And then it's almost like right now, what is happening, it's not working. Nothing's working, right? So if we get to that point, it's like nothing's working. Something needs to change. Then we have willingness, we have growth. That's growth in itself, being able to say, I need to take a different step or I need to do things differently.
I have a famous quote too. I don't know who said it, but kind of like what you said. And it kind of really guides me now. It says that life is kind of like you're in a stream, right? And you're flowing downstream. If you lift your legs up, you're going to go where the stream takes you. You might hit a rock. You may go into the bank. But the moment that you put your feet down, right? The moment that you put your feet down and you try to stop the flow of life, of the stream, whatever it is, you're still getting dragged forward because chances are you're not going to just stay. So the philosophy behind it to me is you lift your legs and go with the flow. You can control where you're going. But when you put your feet down and make a stand, you're going to get drugged and not necessarily in the direction you want to go. And it could hurt your feet, that metaphor. But it really helped me to understand, to lift my feet and kind of go with the flow. With direction, choices is so important and all of that. And that's what I believe a lot of the people who get involved in hospice, get involved in death care, actually do. They want to go with that flow, and they're waking up to it, and they're seeing it and participating. And this podcast, reaching out to other people, is maybe lighting a spark for 2 or 3 other people to either participate in hospice, be a volunteer, or they know a loved one and say, hey, maybe we should do this because it could make your life easier.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I have one more question for you, because in your heart, what do you wish our culture understood more deeply about death, dying, and grief?
Wow. Basically to acknowledge it. It's coming. It's there. Don't hide under a rock. Don't be an ostrich with your head in the sand. And if you know what the future brings, you don't know when or how it may happen, but if you have settled it in your heart that you're okay with what's happening, not only can you be the light for someone else, but you're also your own light and saying, this is my path. Your body just like when you're born, your body knows how to take that first breath. You may need a little pat on the back, but when you're dying, believe it or not, your body knows how to die. It starts shutting down the non-critical things. And you have to wake up and acknowledge that, I think, is the best thing. This training I'm going through has completely remodeled the way I'm thinking about my own death.
Yeah.
So wake up and know that there's people that can help you with that.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Mom, for being here. And I'm so excited that we had this conversation. And for those who maybe want to talk to you about this more.
Sure.
Do you have any information that you want to share? Like
the organization that I volunteer for, it's based throughout South Florida as well as in Florida. It's an organization called Trust Bridge, and I became aware of them going to their website, and it has so many volunteer opportunities.
That's awesome.
It's so volunteer focused, so it's a great way to get involved.
Okay. Thank you so much,
You're welcome.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.